Welcome to A Dozen Ways to Promote Your Podcast. I have two pieces of good news and one piece of bad news. The good news is that I actually have 24 ways to promote your podcast. The bad news is that I only have enough time to give you a dozen of them. So the first half will be in this presentation. The other piece of good news is that at the end of this, I'm going to give you my email address, and you can just write to me and request for me to send you the other 12 ways that you can promote your podcast. So I want to get started by sharing my screen. And in this presentation, I want you to understand that at the beginning, while it's going to sound like I'm being very, I don't want to say egotistical, but patting myself on the back, that is not the case. What I'm wanting to do here is to show you the things that I've been able to accomplish in a way that as I'm saying them, you kind of put your own voice to it and your own podcast to it. And you understand where you can go with this if you follow through on these things. I should say there's a third piece of good news, which is that the overwhelming majority of these cost you nothing at all, just time. So understand that going into this, not only the dozen I'm going to give you here, but the additional dozen I'm going to give you when you email me for those other 12, this is not breaking the bank. This is not, in most cases, spending any money at all. So let's go through here and understand who I am, what qualifies me to do this, and get you started in seeing what this can do for you and personalize it to yourself, like I said, as you're listening to me talk. So I want you to listen to this and realize that these are very actionable items. These aren't things that it's going to take an army to do for you. So let's get started here. And I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and what my podcasting journey has been. As you see there on the screen, I am the creator, producer, host, founder, chief cook and bottle washer of Now Hear This Entertainment, which I launched in February of 2014. And this is something that you want to say, and this is not the list starting, but when you are talking about your podcast, you want to be proud of, but more importantly, show the dedication, so show the consistency. So in my case, Now Hear This Entertainment has been delivered on time every week for more than 6 years. And the show has gotten listeners from 153 countries around the world. These are the kind of statements that you want to be making about your show so that people understand, okay, this is something that I probably want to be involved with. Now, on a similar note, you see there on the screen that my show, and I'm not even going to read from what's on the screen because I almost have this memorized because of all the emails that I send out to guests that I'm trying to book on the show. So I have gotten guests on Now Hear This Entertainment that have ranged from Roy Orbison Jr. to the keyboard player for Aerosmith, the lead guitar player for Garth Brooks, the drummer for Cheap Trick, the bass player for Pink, the trumpet player for Billy Joel. I've interviewed 3 Grammy Award winners, a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, a Las Vegas headliner, 3 Emmy Award winners, and even participants from American Idol, The Voice, America's Got Talent, and The X Factor. So again, if you can kind of build up that kind of guest list, presuming that you're doing a show that involves interviews, and don't worry, this whole presentation is not based on having to have an interview style show, but if you can, and you can start to do that, you're going to see as I talk through this, how that benefits you further. A little more background, I was hired by Tascam. Hopefully everybody knows who Tascam is. They do so much audio gear. They've been doing it for more than 45 years globally. They hired me in August 2017 to do a podcast that we created together called Tascam Talkback. I was doing that show every other week up until February of 2019. It was a podcast for podcasters and streamers. And it's just very coincidental, but at the same time that that one ended, I launched in February of 2019 Catholic Sports Radio, which is a weekly podcast as well. So currently I'm doing 2 weekly podcasts. I do Now Hear This Entertainment every week, and I do Catholic Sports Radio. So already you hear everything I just said and you say, my gosh, how in the world is he doing all this and getting the attention that it seems like he's getting? And I'm here to tell you that it's by being a promoter. So here's why we're talking about this though, because I do understand that podcasters are overwhelmed by a lot of things, which I'm going to go through here in just a moment. But I also want you to think about the old field of dreams, build it and they will come concept, because the way that relates to podcasting is if you think that once you have a podcast and you just put it on iTunes and you put it on Spotify, that people will find it, I'm here to tell you, you need to change your attitude right away, that you're completely wrong and that you're going to be swimming in a sea of so many other fish, that nobody's going to find you, especially based on a tiny little art logo, a tiny little, your show art, your show logo that is so small that I don't care how good it is, it's not going to stand out amidst so many others. So these things are really important for you to do, so that people can become aware of, find, and listen to your show. Now, as I started to say, I know we are all already overwhelmed, those of us that do interview shows, by things like finding guests. Those of us who edit our own shows, and yes, I edit my own shows, that's time consuming as well. We are also, as podcasters, overwhelmed by writing for your next episode, whether it's an interview style show or not. And as much as we all get accused of it, we're partially guilty of having time set aside that we're looking at our stats. A lot of podcasters are worried about how to monetize their show. And sometimes you get bogged down evaluating behind the scenes elements such as equipment or what other podcasters, especially in your niche, are doing. And some people are still spending time getting bogged down with trying to get ratings and reviews. But I'm here to tell you that what I'm about to go through, this list of a dozen ways to promote your podcast, plus the other 12 that I'll email to you, it does all really work. When I am on the guest side, I have been successful getting interviewed on the radio, on television, on other podcasts. I've been written about in newspapers and in online media. There was a guest on my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, which if you didn't figure it out by that guest list that I went through, I interview guests who are having success in entertainment, primarily music. And one fella came to me and he said, when my new album came out, there were two shows that I wanted to get interviewed on first, yours and one other. So listen for things like that, because when people start making statements like that to you, you're going to know that, okay, I'm doing something right, that people are seeking me out. The promotion that I have done for my show is what helps better guests see that it's a worthy outlet. So I take you back to that introduction. When they hear you saying how many countries you've gotten listeners from, when they hear you saying the type of guests that you've had on, when they hear you saying how regular your show has been delivered, that's when people will come to you like this fellow did that I mentioned. So, ready? Here we go with the list. A dozen ways to promote your podcast. Number one on the list is media interviews. You heard me say in there about getting yourself interviewed on radio, on television, the list that I was giving. And initially you're going to say, yeah, I know, get interviewed on other podcasts. That's not what I said. I said media interviews. So on the radio, on television, in newspapers, magazines, online media. This is, I don't want to say untapped territory. I want to say forgotten territory, because it has become so in vogue to get interviewed on other podcasts that podcasters are forgetting that, wait a minute, there's traditional media out there that give me a great opportunity to get more exposure. But here's the catch. Okay, you have to have a hook for why they should interview you. You can't just say, well, I have an interesting podcast. Well, that's your opinion. And so when you can tie it in with something that they're going to connect with and say, okay, the audience would be interested in this, that's when they will be interested in interviewing you. You have to think of on the 11 o'clock news, when they finish the first sequence of the show, they say, coming up after the break, we'll tell you about, and they tell you something that you say, my gosh, hold on, I can't change the channel or walk away. I got to stick around and hear that. So you have to tell them what it is about your show that is going to interest them in booking you and interest their audience in that interview. Now, this flows nicely into number two on the list. I don't even say in this presentation anything about having a website for your podcast, because that should be a given. you absolutely positively should already have a website for your podcast. No questions about it. Within that website, you should have a section that shows all the media coverage that you've gotten. You'd be surprised how many media people want to see first that, okay, we're not taking a chance on this person. They're established. We've seen how many interviews they've done already. They've got a whole bunch of them listed on their website. So we know that they've gone through this before and they're not going to be real green or be a rookie and freeze up when we go to talk to them. But what I'm driving at here ultimately, and this number 2 on the list, is to post that media coverage on your show website. And if you get interviewed on the radio, if you get interviewed on a podcast, what I'm driving at is if these are audio interviews that you're getting for yourself, turn them into YouTube videos. YouTube, we've all heard it said before, second largest search engine in the world. And if you don't have any kind of presence on YouTube, this might be the way to establish some sort of a presence where somebody who otherwise might not find out about your podcast finds out about it because they saw a video that you put on YouTube. And you're saying, Bruce, you just said these are audio interviews. So what are we putting as the video? Here's how you do it. I got to go through this quickly because I don't have a lot of time and I still got 10 more tips to give you. When I'm talking, I put up a picture of myself. When the host of the show is talking, I put up his or her picture. When it comes back to me, if I'm talking about the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, I put up the podcast logo. When it goes back to the host, I will put up, if it's a podcast, I'll put up the podcast logo. If it's a radio show, I'll put up the show's logo if there is one. It comes back to me. Maybe I start talking about my ebooks. So then I'm going to put up the ebooks as an image. When it goes back to them, if it's a radio station, now instead of the show, I'll put up the radio station logo. And you can mix those up all throughout the video so that people will want to stay in tune with watching the video and not tuning out because you just put one static image that you let run throughout the whole video. People are going to see that, oh wait, there's images changing, and they're going to stick around and listen longer. So that's a way that you can really get extra mileage out of those interviews, is turn them into YouTube videos. Number 3 on the list is have a business card just for your show. Now, I realize that my little square on this video is small, so I'll hold this up again at the end of the video, but I'm showing right now on the screen, I'm holding up a business card that I have just for the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast. You can see it's printed on both sides. I should have grabbed the one that I have for Catholic Sports Radio because I do have a business card just for that show as well. But the bottom line here is you don't want to be handing out your 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job business card and telling people about your podcast because they're not going to remember. And we know how it is when you go to a networking event or some kind of conference or whatever it is where you're passing out business cards, you come home with a nice little stack of those and you don't go through them immediately. You wait a few days or till the following weekend or maybe a week or 10 days later. And as you're going through all these, if somebody picks one up and looks at it and it says Bank of America, they're going to say, why do I have a business card from somebody at Bank of America? I don't even bank with them. So they're not going to remember that you are somebody who has a podcast. Never mind, they're not going to remember what your podcast is about. And if you tell me, well, Bruce, I'll just write on the back of my Bank of America business card what my show is, that's not good branding. That's not making a good impression. And already you're off on the wrong foot. People are going to say, oh, well, this is obviously a hobby. Now, granted, a lot of people could be doing this in their spare time as a hobby, but don't have it look that way. Have it look like this is a full-time thing for you and that you're fully committed, because you never know who you might be talking to and what if they want to sponsor your show. So you never know who that card might get in the hands of. You want to have as much information on there as you can about your podcast, what it's about, where it can be found, that type of thing. Number 4, and of course you can see that I am wearing a polo shirt here that has my Now Hear This Entertainment podcast logo on it, but have apparel for your podcast. I have so many different shirts. I have polo shirts. I have long sleeve t-shirts. I have short sleeve t-shirts. This polo shirt has the podcast logo embroidered on the front, and it has the website address embroidered on the back. On the t-shirts, I just get it printed on there. So they print the logo on the back. I print all kinds of information. I print the website address. I put logos on the back for iTunes/Apple Podcasts, for Spotify, for probably a good half dozen platforms so people know where they can listen to it. But this is valuable real estate. I even have hats that have the Now Hear This logo on the front, And on the back, it says www.nhte.net so that someone can see the website address for it. So don't go to these events and just wear a blank shirt or a shirt with your favorite band on it when it's a perfect opportunity to be promoting. I sit way up in the front. That way people sit and stare at the back of my shirt throughout the whole time. And eventually they say, I got to look and see, what is this nhte.net on the back of this guy's shirt that I've been staring at all this time? Now, next is public speaking. And it says there, even if your talk is on something else. So here's where I'm going with that. I mentioned before about my Catholic Sports Radio podcast. Well, I have a whole background having worked in the National Hockey League. I worked in the Olympic movement. I have such a long background working in sports that someone might want to invite me to be a speaker at a sports night. And so I'm not going to turn that down. I'm going to say, sure, I'd love to. And yes, the overwhelming majority of my talk that I give that night will probably be 92% what they asked me to speak about. But little places here and there, I'm going to make sure I slip in some reference to my Catholic Sports Radio podcast. But here's the other part. Where you're really going to get a lot of mileage out of this is sitting down at the table, especially if it's a dinner, before you get up and give your talk. And then afterwards, when you finish and everyone wants to come up and shake hands and take pictures and all that kind of thing, and then you, by the way, give out those business cards that I just talked about, that's when you're sitting at the table beforehand and when you're talking to people after you're done talking, that's when you can really talk a lot about your podcast and not have to worry about the fact that the talk that you just gave wasn't primarily about your podcast subject matter. Next on the list is promotional items specific to your podcast. And again, I'll hold this up at the end as well. But this is a container that has the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast logo on it. Below it, it has the website address. And inside, there are earbuds. And that makes sense because it makes you think of listening to music and it makes you think of listening to a podcast. If you give me a koozie, that's not going to make me think about your podcast. Everybody gives out koozies. It's tired. It's overdone. The same thing with pens. Just please stop giving those out and get creative. If you're a home handyman and you come to look at my broken garbage disposal and you write up an estimate, say, let me know if you want to do it. You can give me a call in a couple of days. And you also give them a little screwdriver that has a refrigerator magnet behind it. It has your company website, your company name, and your phone number on there. I'm going to put it on the fridge. A day after you leave, I'm going to look at that estimate and say, I don't know, I wonder if I can fix this myself. I'm going to grab that screwdriver, try to jimmy around with the garbage disposal myself. I'm going to realize I can't fix it. And who am I going to call? The guy that's on the screwdriver, which makes sense because he's a home handyman. So think of something that makes sense for what your podcast is about. Have a promotional item that is specific to your podcast. Now, look how far I went into this presentation before I mentioned social media. So there you see it on the screen, but I also said there, preferably one or more accounts just for your show. So I hope you've been seeing at the bottom of my slides, I have my Twitter account there and I have my Instagram. Yes, if you go on my Twitter, if you go on my Facebook, those are for my company. So you will occasionally see tweets, you will occasionally see Facebook posts about the podcast, but I'm also posting company business on there. However, on that Instagram account that you see at the bottom of all my slides, that Instagram account is just for my podcast. And I post to it, hold on to your hats, I post to it 7 days a week. Bruce, didn't you say earlier that your show only comes out once a week? Yes, but I'm a promoter and I don't want people to forget about my podcast. I'm not just going to post on Instagram on the day that a new episode comes out. So go look at that at Now Hear This Entertainment Instagram account. Follow me. I don't care. Steal my ideas. I'm here to help you. You'll see that every Monday I use a quote from an old episode to throw people back to go listen to those, but it also helps me with something to post about. So don't just think that if you're just posting on social media, you're already promoting your podcast, because I'm giving you 11 other ways and you're going to email me and I'm going to give you 12 more on top of that. Don't just rely on social media. Next on the list is award nominations. Award nominations are great because as people go in to vote, they look and see who the other competitors are. And so all of a sudden, somebody may decide to check out your podcast. If you think of what I just talked about, social media, now it gives you something to post on social media. And eventually, if you remember earlier when I was saying people are going to look at how many countries you're in, people are going to look at how many episodes you've done, that you're posting consistently, what your guests are like. Then if they start hearing that you've gotten all these awards, they're not going to remember if they were nominations or if you actually won. They're just going to say this person must be doing something right if their show is getting all these accolades, all this attention. So seek out award nominations. And I'm not just talking about in the podcasting world, by the way. There's local newspapers that do contests. There's local TV stations that do contests. There's contests within, say, the music world that I could submit the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast to. So don't just think about a podcasting award in the podcast community. Look in your own space and find out what award opportunities are out there. Next is to give the guests the roadmap for promoting their appearance on your show. What I mean by that is you need to tell them in an email, the episode came out today, here's where people can find it, here are the accounts I would like you to tag, right? So they tag your Facebook, they tag your Twitter, they tag your Instagram. Don't just tell them when the episode is coming out and then not contact them the day that it comes out, because then you have no right to complain when they don't put anything up. Or you say, oh, all they posted was X. Well, that's because you didn't give them a roadmap. You didn't give them what you want them to say. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you're going to bat 1,000 and they're all going to use what you tell them, but those that will, it's going to make you feel good that you helped them out. I even give them the logo for my podcast in case they want to use it in their post. I'm trying to give them no excuse, no reason to not post about their appearance on my podcast. Okay, another one is other interest groups. For instance, Carly Perez is a former WWE diva. I interviewed her on Now Hear This Entertainment. And so then I started looking up wrestling websites. I'm talking about fan sites. And pretty soon they were posting about the interview because they knew that other wrestling fans like them would want to hear what a former WWE diva had to say. Joe Vitale is the drummer for Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh was a member of the Eagles. So I was looking for the same thing, fan websites for the Eagles. Matt Sherrod is the drummer for Crowded House. So when I interviewed him and that episode came out, I made sure that I was not just tagging Matt, but I was tagging the band. So I thought Crowded House might look at those social media posts and say, aha, our drummer was interviewed. We should spread the word. People might want to hear what he said. Maybe he talked about us. Next on this list is gimmicks, which I love gimmicks. For instance, a cake, the picture that you see there, back when I hit 100 episodes, I went to the local bakery in the supermarket. I emailed them my podcast logo. I said, could you design a cake that has 100 on there? And all of a sudden people see that you've got this big occasion. Again, it's now a social media post. So if you're hitting milestones, something like it was 1 year ago today that, if you just even are flat out of ideas and you look back and see, oh, it was 1 year ago today that episode 32 came out, who cares that it's not a nice round number like 50 or 100 or whatever? The bottom line is you can say something about your podcast that day instead of just going quiet and saying, I don't have anything to post about. Okay, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to give you one final one, which is to cross-promote, and then cross-promote some more. And what I mean by that is I write a blog every week. In the blog, I often talk about the podcast, and I send people from the blog over to the podcast. Occasionally on the podcast, I will say, hey, I wrote about this recently in my weekly blog. Just go to the show website, nhte.net, click into the blog section, and I'll tell them what it was titled or what the date was, or sometimes I'll just say, I think it might have been called something like X, but I'm trying to keep people all under my umbrella. Now, I also have ebooks that within the ebooks, I'm referencing episodes of the podcast. And so somebody might only find those ebooks, but all of a sudden now I'm cross-promoting, and as they're reading it, it's clickable and they can go back and listen to a podcast episode. So keep people within your own umbrella, under your own umbrella, and cross-promote all over the place so that you keep them bouncing around to all these different properties that you own and not sending them off to, I read a great story on such and such a website, here's a link, and now they're over there. And even if it opens in a new window, they have forgotten about you. So you want to do as much as you can to keep them within your property so that they're turning into podcast listeners. They might only find your blog, and all of a sudden they don't know, oh, this person has a podcast. Now they start listening. So in conclusion, I said at the beginning, I kept stressing the word you, things that you can do, things that you can do. If you don't do these things, then who's going to do them for you? So some of these things, and as I said, I have 12 more that you can email me for. Some of them may seem very basic, very fundamental, but challenge yourself, do a self-audit, look in the mirror and say, am I doing these things? As basic as some of them might sound, am I doing them? If not, then put them into place. So there on the screen, you see my email address. And yes, those hyphens do need to go into your email when you write to me, bruce@now-here-this.net, spelled HEAR. And ask me questions if you have questions about these, but also just write to me and say, I saw your presentation and I would love to get those other 12 and find out what more I could be doing to promote my podcast, because it's a very crowded landscape out there. And there's so many podcasts and so many new people coming on as podcasters that you need to do everything you can to get your show noticed. So use the 12 I gave you, write to me at that email address that you saw, bruce@now-here-this.net. Back up the video if you need to pause it, just so that you can copy it down if I stop sharing my screen too quickly, and write to me, and know that I wish you all the success with your podcast, and I'd be happy to help if you have any questions. Thanks so much.